Hey, good morning, guys. Hope you had a great weekend, and we're going to talk a little bit about Rome today, the beginnings of Rome. Remember that Rome and Greece were civilizations that were happening at the same time, but Greece started much earlier, and eventually Greece will fall, and Rome will take over. But this isn't at that point. This is kind of the beginning of Rome. So we had learned that Rome had some issues. The Etruscan people came and basically were the ones who really started Rome. But the problem was that they set up a monarchy and they treated their people really, really bad. They were really harsh from this Tarquin family. And so eventually what happens is the Roman people, they revolt and they take up arms and weapons, and they by force kick out the Tarquin family, and they set up a new kind of government called a republic, which was a new idea at the time, which is also known as a representative democracy, which is what we have in the United States. Now, their republic was different than ours, but it was the first idea of having a democracy where the citizens vote for representatives to do the work. Okay, so here's kind of how it was set up. The republic is a form of government where the leader is voted for by the citizens, and that the citizens have the power. But the citizens don't actually directly vote on the different items. And this will really last from 509 BC to 82 BC. So, about 420 or 30 years. So it lasts for quite a while. It'll go through many, many changes throughout that time. And the other thing that was true about Rome really throughout its entire existence was it was always at war. It was always had at war with enemies, but also at war with others trying to gain more land and more power. And so these Romans, this new idea of republic, they had to conquer the Etruscans, who were the original Romans, and up in the north, and they even then had to conquer the Greeks down in the southern part of Italy, because the Greeks had colonies down there, and so the Romans kicked them out, and they began to gain power using this form of government called a republic. So the Roman Republic, basically the society was set up in two classes. The high class were called the patricians. They were the wealthy landowning people, and the low class were called the plebeians. So wealthy landowners were the high class. These were nobles that made up the ruling class. In other words, they were the ones in charge. And you were born into this group. So it wasn't like you worked your way up to it. There was a smaller number of them, but they held all the power. The lower class was what was most of Rome's people. They were artisans, shopkeepers, owners of small farms. They were the hard-working middle class and lower class. And basically, the majority of people were plebeians. Of course, there was another group of people, too, who were slaves, but they were just thrown into that class of plebeians as well. But both classes, whether you were patrician or plebeian, were considered citizens. Okay. So they were given citizenship, which means they had basic rights and responsibilities. So, first of all, they had the right to vote, which is a big deal. The Greeks were the first ones that had this idea, and the Romans pick up that idea and continue it. Of course, women were not allowed to vote. It was only men. But plebeians and patricians were allowed to vote. Both classes had to pay taxes. Patrician and plebeians, it was harder for the plebeians to pay taxes because they made less money. But the taxes are just like in any system, helps pay for the government, the roads, the army, all those important things. And then every plebeian had to serve in the army, so it was one of his rights, or responsibilities, duties, if you will. The patricians did too, but the patricians also, because they're so wealthy, quite often could buy their way out of their duty. So it wasn't always fair. So the patricians sometimes used their wealth and power to get out of fighting. And also the patricians were the only ones who were allowed to be the leaders, like the generals and that, to lead the armies. So you had to be in the ruling class, the high class. So patricians, plebeians, two classes. How their government was set up, instead of having one like president, they had two guys in charge. They were called consuls. They were the top government officials. They had to be patricians. They couldn't be a plebeian. And each year there were two new ones chosen each year. So they had to get what they needed to get done in a year's time. Basically what they did, they were in charge of the army, made all the decisions where the army went, and they ran the government. Not unlike what our president did. But the difference was there were two of them. So they had to be in agreement with each other. And if they weren't, they could veto or reject each other's decisions. So both councils had to be in agreement, kind of a way of keeping them in line. And the President of the United States today has this power as well to veto. So if the Congress creates a law and signs it in, like they vote for it and they say, we want this new law, it has to be signed by the president. He can either sign it or he can veto it and say, nope, I don't agree. And then it has to go back to the Congress. So that was a Roman idea, and we use it today. And then finally, the praetors were kind of like our judges. So they were the ones who would interpret the laws, make sure they were fair and just, and act as judges. Praetors had to be patricians, and so usually when they made decisions on if the law was fair, they would make sure it was fair for patricians, and they weren't always concerned about making the laws fair for the plebeians. It was really, really not fair to the lower class plebeians. Finally, the Senate, which was really the most important, most powerful lawmaking body, there were 300 men who were patrician. So you notice they had to be of the higher class. And once they were in, they were there for life. So if they were bad or corrupt, or if they lied or were dishonest or any of that, you couldn't get rid of them. They were there until they died or till they quit. But the Senate, they were the ones who really came up with the laws. They were patricians. So think about all the laws that were made were almost always made to benefit the patrician class, the high class, and not the low class. It was usually about what lands, if they gained lands when they conquered somebody, the lands would be distributed not to the poor, to the plebeians, but to the patricians. It would be if new monies, or maybe when they conquered people, there were more, slaves that were captured, right? Because when they conquered somebody, they put them into slavery. Those ideas, decisions of who would get the money or the slaves or any of that was made by the Senate, and usually the patricians were the ones who got all of the benefits of that. Eventually, after a couple hundred years or so, the Senate got even more and more powerful, where they could propose laws, hold debates, and even get in charge of building programs, deciding what buildings and roads and new cities and city buildings that needed to be built. So the Senate had lots of power to spend the money and to spend the resources and to help decide even where armies would go and fight in that. So they were very, very powerful. So just to recap, a republic was set up. It was not as fair as we have in the United States today. Women couldn't vote. And there were two classes, and only the high class, the patricians, were allowed to actually, be in charge, like to be part of the Senate or the councils. The plebeian people were very, very mistreated at first. And we're going to learn later what's going to happen is the plebeian people are going to revolt, and they're going to go up against the patricians and fight back. And it's going to cause a lot of conflict, but it's going to make some good changes too. So we'll learn about that soon. So anyway, I hope you learned a lot. And make sure you put your notes in your binder and click it in there. And very good possibility you might have a quiz sometime soon. Don't forget to be working on your chart, your 8 characteristics of a civilization chart. Make sure that is due at the end of the week. So make sure you're getting that done too. All right, guys, you have a great day, and we will be talking at you later. See you.